There's one thing about economics that you have to know, and yet most people don't know about it. So today, I'm going to explain to you a very basic economics lesson and hopefully shock you a little bit. Well, some of you who don't know this. So, let me take you through this super simple scenario that I've designed in order to explain the principle. Now, it is a little bit silly, but once you grasp the principle, it all kind of makes sense. So you can add the complexity and all the stuff that I've missed out back onto it, and you'll go, oh yeah, that makes sense now, right? So, I've designed it to be a little bit unrealistically simple, but just bear with me for the minute. It'll all make sense when I get into it. So, here's the deal. This is the bakery. Welcome to the evil bakery, because it's run by an evil capitalist. And you can see his horns. So, imagine this whiteboard is just the bakery walls. There is nothing else outside of the bakery. It exists in its own little universe. And the capitalist earns £100 a day for whatever reason. There's no taxation. Productivity level is 10, which means one worker for £10 a day can produce 10 loaves of bread. Okay? So, and this is where the unrealistic bit comes into it. This guy eats whatever he produces, which is technically not true in the real economy, obviously. But we'll just stick with it for now, because it's not important at this minute in time. We'll see in a bit what happens when you don't eat what you consume. So each worker produces 10 loaves of bread and gets £10, which means each loaf of bread is £1. And their living standards is 10 pieces of bread, so 10 loaves of bread each. So 10 products each is their living standard. Note, the evil capitalist doesn't eat any bread because he just exists off the tears of the working class. So, the evil capitalist has two options, basically. Maybe three, but let's go with two. And the first option is he could not be evil. He could be a really good, nice guy and be like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give all my money to all of my workers and give them a fair wage. So what he's going to do is going to take his £100 and he's going to give £10 to each worker. Right? So let's just imagine that happens. Do their living standards go up? No. Because they've now got £20 each, but there's only 10 loaves of bread each. They physically can't have 20 loaves of bread because they haven't made 20 loaves of bread. There's only so many products in the economy. So there's a few different options here. What could happen? They could save the money, but there's no point because there's nothing else to buy. So maybe they save it for a rainy day. Either way, pointless. Or this guy goes, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to buy 20 loaves of bread. I'll get to the shop early and buy 20 loaves of bread. So he buys 20 loaves of bread. 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 And these guys go hungry. Or they go, well, I've got 20 quid each. Each. So I've got 20 quid, so I'll buy some loaves of bread off the guy who's already bought his loaves of bread, and he's like, well, I'm not going to sell it for £1 because I've already bought it for £1, so I'll sell it for £1.50. And then eventually what happens is the money, after a couple of days, the money goes like that, and it all works out again. And all that happens, instead of being £1 for a loaf of bread, it's now £2 for a loaf of bread, and everybody gets £20 and everybody gets 10 loaves of bread. That's it. There's no other way. They can't produce more bread in this scenario. They're not producing anymore, and as a result, they're not gaining anymore. So actually adding the money and giving the workers a fair wage doesn't actually work. But the option two is take this money and boost your production level. So you could buy new equipment, ovens or oven mitts. I haven't worked in a bakery, so I don't know exactly what you could do in this scenario. But let's just say you boost the technology level. So now it's electric ovens rather than stone ovens, or I don't know, something like that. Or there's new innovations or new processes, mass producing bread, whatever it is. You boost the production level. And let's just say hypothetically, this boosts it, doubles because it's 100. So let's just say it boosts it by 10. Now, suddenly, each one of these can produce 20 loaves of bread each. in this fictional scenario, right? Or even if it just increases by 1, whatever. They can increase the amount of bread they can make in the same amount of time. So what happens is, you'll go, well, yeah, but they've got no extra money. Well, no, because the production level goes up. They don't work any longer, they just make more. So let's just say it doubles, so they now make 20 loaves of bread. This guy's like, well, if I keep charging £1 per loaf of bread, and I've got all these guys making bread, then there's going to be 100 loaves extra, which is just going to rot. So I need to decrease the amount of the cost of the bread, right? So he was going to either put his prices down by 50%, and you might say that's unrealistic. I'll get to a scenario where it is realistic. He might put his prices down so that they can afford it, in which case everybody's products, they can now afford 20 loaves of bread each, in which case their living standards go up to 20 loaves of bread. Or he might go, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to make 5 people unemployed because I don't need to make as much bread anymore. There's only demand for 10 loaves of bread each, let's say. So I'll make 5 people unemployed, but these 5 can make 20 loaves of bread. So now we've got, a scenario where there's 5 workers working and 5 workers not working. However, this guy is like, hey, wait a second, I've got this cool new idea. So he goes to the evil capitalist, who's now also a banker, because in this super simple scenario, I can't bother drawing a banker. So he goes to the banker and he's like, hey, can you lend me $100 or pounds? I would like to make a new factory. He's like, fine, you give me some interest, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, sure. So he then goes off, he makes a new factory because, there's people who can work for him. So he goes off and makes a new factory. Let's call it the clothes factory, because at this minute in time, everybody's naked. The naked bakery. And so he then employs these guys to make clothes. And let's just say, hypothetically, the scenario, they make 200 clothes as well, so it all balances out. Whatever. The point of the matter is that their living standards will go up and they'll receive more products. So in actuality, it's basically a recession. These guys lose their jobs, but they will go and work elsewhere to boost the economy. Now you might be saying, it's not realistic. That's not how an economy works. Actually it is. So back in the day, in the 1700s, it used to take one worker an entire day to make 1 pin. Okay? 1 pin. P-I-N. Pin. So, I don't know what the cost of living was back then. But let's say today let's say hypothetically it was £100 a day to work, right? So a pin would cost £100, and you couldn't have it any cheaper because it took all day to make. Then an evil capitalist came along, or an entrepreneur or whatever, inventor, boosted the production level to 4,400 pins a day with one worker. So this guy could now make 4,400 pins at a push of a button almost. And that put a lot of people out in the street in terms of employment, right? And to this day, we still have vast numbers of the population unemployed as a result of the pin men. No, because they went on and did something else. Because if you think about it, if one worker, let's say, got £100 a day, it's not going to cost £100 per pin because there's 4,400 pins being produced per day. So as a result, the cost of the pins goes down dramatically, which is why at the minute, and as of this recording, you can buy 1,600 pins for £8.99, which is a lot cheaper than what you would have paid had you had to pay a worker all day to make 1 pin. So the cost of the products comes down. The pin men are out in the streets and on unemployment for about 5 minutes, well, maybe a few months. But the good news is that they can then go on and find new jobs because the consumer saves their money, right? If I wanted to buy a pin, I don't have to spend £100 buying a pin. I just spend $8.99 and I've got the remaining £91 and a penny to spend elsewhere, which allows me to spend it elsewhere. So new industries will spring up as a result. He might go, oh, there's a demand for clothes in this naked bakery. I'm going to make a clothes factory. That's a brilliant idea. Here's £100. Give me some interest back once you make some money. Okay, boom. That's actually how economies grow. And most people have a negative perception of capitalists. They have a negative perception of managers and leaders, and they have a negative perception of entrepreneurs as well. Or at least they don't understand it. Most people that you speak to think, oh yeah, they're exploiting somehow. And that's really not the case. So if we take the scenario again, so £10 each for 10 products, if everybody produces half as much because they're all lazy, then, well, the economy's bad. The economy halves, okay? If they halve the production, they halve the goods they can actually consume. So it's actually in the workers' best interest to work as hard as they possibly can do. And a good way to ensure that that happens is to have managers and leaders who are managing them. And you can actually see this if everybody gets paid the same in a particular job or on minimum wage. So if we have a worker that just stops working but still gets paid £10 in this scenario, then every other worker works for 10 but can only buy 9 because the products end up getting distributed evenly because of the money situation. So working for minimum wage and you have some workers work less, what you're effectively doing is subsidizing those workers who aren't as efficient as the other workers are. And not only that, having worked minimum wage jobs myself, what I can tell you does happen is that somebody looks over and goes, oh, they're not producing as much as I am, they're not working as hard as I am, and I'm working hard and getting paid the same. What's the point of working as hard? I may as well not work as hard because I still get paid the same regardless of how much output I produce. So an evil manager will come along and quote-unquote exploit the workforce by kicking the person who isn't working as hard and getting them to produce more, again, disciplining them. And that actually, yes, it's bad for that one worker who wanted to be lazy or just isn't quite as capable as everybody else, but it also benefits everybody if every worker works as hard as they can do. Or you don't pay everybody the same. You pay them for their output. And in that scenario, yeah, everybody then who works hard will get the rewards for that. And this is a lot fairer because if you have equality of outcome, then if you produce 3 items and somebody else produces 1, so a total of 4, and you get paid by splitting the profits by 2, so in this case both of you get paid the same, which is 2 each. If you are a hard worker, you are subsidizing the workers who are not as hard working as you, and this encourages you to work less. Whereas if we compare this to equality of opportunity, then yes, you produced more, you therefore get rewarded for doing that, and the person who works less gets punished for working less, and that is fair. Because what this does is that it encourages the person who produces less to better themselves, to take responsibility and say, yeah, I need to actually improve my work ethic and so on and so forth, or my skills, and if I do so, I will be directly rewarded for doing that, and therefore, yeah, I think this is a good idea, I need to work harder. And by working harder and encouraging everyone to work harder, again, you have this direct result that it actually boosts the economy as a whole and boosts everybody's living standards as a whole. And it even encourages the worker who is working hard to improve themselves even more and perhaps rise up the ranks and so on and so forth. It's a direct financial incentive to do so. It benefits him, the family, it benefits the entire economy. It's just good all around. Paying everyone the same leads to less production. When you talk about equality, you don't want equal pay or equal outcome, you want equal opportunity. That is the fairest way to run an economy. And it's in every worker's best interest to make sure that their colleagues and their other people around them are all working as hard as they possibly can do. And ideally, in an ideal scenario, you want everybody to be employed, but you want everybody to be employed in jobs that are necessary, not jobs that are, in industries that are dying. You don't want to employ everybody to work down the coal mines if nobody's actually buying coal. It's a pointless exercise. You want everybody to be in as good a position as possible. But ultimately, this is why capitalists, managers, entrepreneurs, these guys are necessary as well. They may not necessarily produce anything, but sometimes they do. Capitalists are required for the money in order to get businesses going. Entrepreneurs are the ones who set up and create the business. Managers are the ones who manage the workforce, and the workers produce the goods. And usually these guys are all mixed together. You might have a manager who's also a capitalist, or an entrepreneur who's also a capitalist, or a worker who's also an entrepreneur, manager, and a capitalist. And yes, you do get bad managers, you get bad entrepreneurs, you get bad capitalists, but you also get bad workers. None of these groups, even if they were a group, none of these groups are evil or of themselves. That you do get evil people, but that doesn't mean the group as a whole is evil. They are all four of these people are necessary for a successful economy, but it does feel like exploitation when you are on the bottom. But no one's being exploited, and let me explain why. So every purchase in an economy has a buyer and a seller, but in reality that's not the case. In reality, you're both buyers and you're both sellers. One person buys bread with money, while the other person buys money with bread. And the price for both products, both the bread and the money, is really determined by the supply, how much money and how much bread is being produced, and by the demand, how much bread and how much money do you want. So, there's no exploitation going on here. But the thing is, this is buying and selling. People understand this. What they don't understand is employment is also a trade. It's also buying and selling. What's actually happening is a worker is selling his time and skill and buying money off the employer. The employer is then buying your time and skill and selling you the money in return. And there's no exploitation here. If you want more money, then you have a choice. You can either work more hours, get a second job or whatever else, or you can increase your skill level. Workers with higher skills are worth more to their employers. And you can increase your skills in your spare time. Go and buy a book, go and learn a trade, go and take a course, whatever it is, in order to boost your skill level to something that is in demand by a lot of people. Because just like a commodity, like bread or money or whatever else, workers are also affected by supply and demand. If you're unskilled and only willing to work 16 hours a week, let's say, then you're not in demand. And there's a lot of people who are willing to work very few hours and get paid £1 million an hour. And it's a case of, no, your time plus skill is what determines your pay. If the skills that you provide and the job that you're going for is actually in demand. And for an employer, they want to purchase workers who are going to give them the best bang for their buck. They need more skills and more time out of their workforce in order to make a profit. And if they don't make a profit and they make a loss, then they cannot give money, they cannot trade their money for your time and your skill, and therefore the business fails. But you could also have a bad employer who doesn't spend his money wisely, or it's in a dying industry where there isn't much profit and therefore he can't give you more money as a result of this, or there's no innovation going on. Either way, the worker might not get paid as much as they perhaps should get paid with their time plus their skill. So as a result, it's probably best for the worker to find another job in a different industry or whatever else, because there isn't as much demand in this industry. If there was demand, then there would be higher profits and thus higher wages. But because there isn't as much demand, there is lower wages as a result. And I just want to point out, imagine for a second that you won the lottery tomorrow, okay? What would be the first thing you do, okay? So you got two options. Option one is start buying luxury items that you've never been able to buy before, such as houses and cars and stuff like that. Or option two, walk into every single supermarket in your local area and buy all the food so that the poor can't have any food. I think for most people, it would be option one. Why would you go into a supermarket and just buy all the food and then deprive the local population of all their food? It doesn't make any sense. And yet, people persistently say, yes, the rich are stealing from the poor. No, they're not doing that. If they get richer, what they do is they buy more luxury goods. That's what they do. They don't buy more of the same of the, because you can only eat so much a day. You can only consume so much a day. You can only buy so many cars or so many TVs a day. There's no way you can possibly buy tons of stuff and then just hoard it, because you can't use it. It's pointless. So what the rich do when they get richer is they buy more luxury goods and they don't deprive the poor of anything. But yet you get this persistent myth that the rich steal from the poor. Well, the reality is that even if the rich just buy luxury goods like a yacht, I know I'm going to buy a yacht with my newly won millions, what you're doing is keeping the workers who work at the yacht factory in jobs, and you're also investing in, because by default you give that company that builds the yachts money, in which case they can then spend it on either their own business or they invest it in another business, or they put it in a bank and then they invest it or whatever else. So even buying luxury goods ends up helping the economy as a whole. And we've all heard the story of Robin Hood, who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Except he didn't. That's not what he actually did. He didn't steal from the rich and give to the poor. He stole from the king, the state, and gave the money back to the taxpayer. And yet, most people don't know this. They don't realize it. And this is how easy it is to twist history to suit agendas. It's like, oh yeah, no, that's not actually the case. That's not what actually happened. Robin Hood is a hero because he fights back against the state. So really, all these tales about capitalists being evil, that's not necessarily the case. But there is an issue, and that issue is this. This guy is really cool. He's got glasses, he kind of looks like the guy from Cool Spot in the Sega Mega Drive era. And he decides, you know what? We need to protect the bakery from foreign powers. Can't say the word. So he's like, you know what? We need an army. So he goes to this guy and is like, you know what? I can make you an army. He's like, oh, that's cool. Thank you for protecting my bakery. Cool. So, Cool Spot. He then goes and hires a taxman and an army guy, because he looks like an army guy. So, he's a politician, he's a taxman, he's an army guy. He runs off and increases the taxes to 30%, takes £30 from this guy, gives these £10 each, and everybody's happy, except they're not, because now these three are not producing anything. Right? They are no longer producing bread, and there's no other commodities in the economy. So what happens is, these guys are producing 10 products each, but there's 7 of them, so they're now, instead of 100 products, they're now producing 70, and they have to divide it by 10, which is 7. So their living standards have gone down. They're now only on 7 products each, and that's assuming we only pay the politicians the same wage as everybody else, which is not going to ever happen, but there we go. Worse, this guy only has £70 now. He invests that into production level, whereas £100 boosted it by 10. Now 70% of that will be boosted by 7, so production level is now 7. So these 7 guys are now producing 17, right, each. 17 times 6 is 119. Divided by 10 is 11.9. Quick math. So now their living standards have increased to 11.9 items each. Which, if before you doubled it to 20, they're now on 11.9. So in actuality, what's happened is by taxing people and by not having people produce goods or produce products for the consumer, what's actually happened is the production level hasn't increased to as much as it could have done if you hadn't had any taxes at all. So it's actually hurt everybody. And the workers who are actually working are working more. They are producing, let's go back to the beginning. They're producing 10, right? These 7 are producing 10, but they're having to now support the other 30% of the economy which isn't working. So as a result, they're producing 10 each, but only getting 7 products each, right? So they're producing more than they're actually consuming. And that's as a direct result of the government in this situation, or the service, anybody who's not actually producing or doing something that's boosting production, right? Yes, you could actually get this guy to raise taxes to produce an industry, but in order to do that, you have to get people who aren't working, right? So he has to pay for himself, and he has to pay for the tax man, and then he has to pay for the guy who's then going to manufacture. And as a result, even if that guy does produce 10 products in this scenario, it's still 2 people who are not working. So no matter how you do it, the taxation decreases the amount of production in the economy, and it hurts the workers who are working because they have to subsidise and support the remaining ones. And as a result, that's why you see governments who have high taxation, because if you put that to 100%, it's like, well, no investment's going into there at all. So the higher taxation, the more stagnant your economy becomes. And obviously, if you put it to a stupid amount, and notice as well, we've only been taxing the evil capitalist. Taxing the rich actually hurts the poor, not through direct taxation, but through production, because it's these guys who are mostly investing into this, right? These guys might have some savings and whatever else, and they might be able to make their own businesses and startups and whatever else. That's fine. But what's actually happening is the vast amounts of money that is going to the top is not being invested because a lot of it's being taken by tax and whatever else, right? And one more thing. So we talked about government doing tax, but what happens if the government does regulation? Well, this guy is now like cool politician guy. He's like, yes, what I'm going to do is start restricting people somehow, right? So I'm going to introduce legislation that prevents people from prevents people from building their own houses, prevents people from extending their own houses, prevents people from boosting, the height of their house, right? Building skyscrapers in certain towns and villages, blah, 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 right? And in order to do anything, you need to get planning permission, which is actually what happens in the UK. So currently, there's a plot of land near me, which is pretty cheap. It's not this, but let's say it's £10,000, which, bearing in mind the average cost of a house in the UK at the minute is 200,000. So there's a plot of land for 10,000. I could technically buy that, build a shack, and have a house. Okay, and I could do that pretty cheap. It wouldn't be a very good house, but I could have a house by doing that. And I think anybody could do that, but the government won't allow it. You could buy that plot of land, but what you have to do is get planning permission to build the shack on it. In order to build your shack, you need to have given the money to the government, so it's a taxation, but they call it whatever. They don't call it that. They call it a cost. To buy planning permission, you then have to get in a architect to design your luxury shack. And then you have to wait for permission to come back to you, so it could be a no. Right? Now, I'm not a builder. I haven't attempted this because it's like, what's the point? So I don't know the actual cost. But looking online, you can see a lot of people saying, actually, by the time I get to this stage, it could have cost me £10,000 just to get to this stage. So if you bought land for £10,000, By the time you get to this stage, it's £20,000, an extra 10,000. So before you've even started, you're £20,000 into the project, and they could turn around and say no. In which case you're like, well, what's the point of buying the land in the first place? So it disincentivizes people. And that process can take 6 to 8 months to get to that point where you get a no. So it's like people aren't doing it. So lots of people are not building their own houses, which a lot of people are capable of doing anyway. They're also not building or getting people in to build houses because they can't, because they're not getting permission to do it. And also there's height restrictions and so on and so forth, which prevent houses from going, building a skyscraper in a town, because a skyscraper, if it costs let's say it costs £1,000 a plot of land per month, right? But you have 10 buildings or 10 apartments in each skyscraper, then it's £100 each flat. But if you increase it to double it, so there's 20 flats, it's £50 each, because the cost comes down. So the cost for living in those flats comes down because of the height of the building, because you only got a small space of land. But they're restricting that. They're preventing you from doing it. So government legislation restricts the productivity level of, in this case, the housing industry in the UK, and prevents people from building houses, and as a result, fewer people are building houses. And those that are building less, because they're waiting 6 to 8 months to get permission just to build the house, and as a result, house prices are going up. And they're going, oh, I wonder why house prices are going up. It's like, because you've caused it. You have caused it. And then they blame the private industries. It's like, no, the government has caused the housing building crisis, right? That's what's caused it. So house prices are booming now. Now that's good for the people who already own houses, and that's the point. Because, we don't want another house near us. We want that field to be a lovely field to walk my dog. And that's what's happening. They're not, people who have houses are going to the government and going, Mr. Cool Guy, please have these building regulations and prevent people from doing their own thing, right? So basically, people who don't own the land, if I bought the land and I built a house because I was capable of building a house, or even a shack, that's my land. I should be able to do what I want with it, right? In theory. But the government says no. The other people who already own that land around you have a stake in your property. So it's no longer private property, it's public property. And that's why the government is also the public sector. And yeah, this is a book called Economics in One Lesson, The Shortest and Surest Way to Understand Basic Economics by Henry Hazlitt. This is a very good introduction to economics. If you enjoyed this video, I highly recommend you buy this book. This isn't a sponsored video, I'm just recommending you extra reading. By about 3 chapters in, you'll go, oh yeah, I get it now.